What's the fastest way for somebody to go from skinny to muscular?
Kind of a cool conversation for you and I to have, considering I just kind of came off this docuseries on YouTube, right? I know that you paid attention to it because that was kind of my goal. Now, you could argue that I wasn't skinny, right? I've been building muscle for a very long time, and so I wasn't really, really skinny. But the goal was, could I put on 25 pounds of muscle from where I was? And just for the audience, for some context, so they understand the reality of this, because people are going to hear the numbers that I did, and they're going to think, they're going to try and call it real. But just the power of muscle memory. In my peak bodybuilding years, I had 50 more pounds of muscle than I'm currently carrying on my body right now, and I did that for years. And so my body was used to being 240 pounds and 205 of that being all muscle for a long time. And then I stopped competing almost 7 years ago, I think now. And over time, slowly lost 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, about 25 pounds of muscle. Still was a very muscular guy. That means I still had 175, 180 pounds of muscle on my body. And then just this last year, you know this because I know you pay attention to the show, I went on Ozempic, not because I needed to, but because it's been exploding. And one of the things I love about my partners and I is we love to not only understand the science behind a lot of this stuff so we can communicate with players, we like to experience it. So not only can we talk from a medical point, like what's going on, or chemical, what's happening scientifically, and then also be able to, from experience, go man, this is what it felt like, or this is how my clients have experienced things. So I decided to go on this Ozempic journey of let's see what this feels like. That was wild, and the story in itself. And I lost a ton of weight. Why did it? Problem is, I also lost a lot of muscle. I lost another 20 pounds of muscle through that journey, and knowing that I could get it all back. And so I just recently came off of, okay, I'm done with Ozempic. I've now lost all this muscle over the course of, years. Let's document the process of me building it back. So it's important I paint that picture so people understand that I ended up putting on 22 pounds of muscle, and I dropped down to 10% body fat. I think I started at 16. This is all documented, by the way, so people that want to fact check and go back and look at all. I tracked it. I did body fat testing from a place, Body Spec, and I tracked daily all my stuff. So anyways, ended up putting on about 22 pounds of muscle, dropped from 16 point something percent body fat down to 10% body fat. Great transformation. But the point of me bringing this up was that was the goal, right? Was to, can I put on as much muscle as possible as fast as I possibly can? Now, the most important part, and I think the mistake that a lot of people make, is very similar to the same mistake that people who are trying to lose the most amount of weight in the shortest period of time make also. Or I should say the most amount of fat, because losing weight and losing fat are two different things, is they apply too much too fast, and they think the more they do, the more results they're going to get. And I understand why this is so confusing or frustrating, because damn near everything else in our life rewards us for that attitude or that application, right? You study harder and more, you're probably going to learn more and be smarter. You work harder at work, you're probably going to get the promotions and move up the ladder faster, right? You practice your sport more and harder, you're probably going to get better at your sport. You work and do your craft way more. So almost everything else that we do in life serves us to be obsessive and work harder at it. Unfortunately, exercise science doesn't work that way. So when it comes to body composition change and building muscle or burning body fat, it does not work that way. It is not. The harder you go, the more intensity, the more you apply, the more results you get. And so I think the same exact mistake that people make on their fat loss journey, they make on their muscle building journey. And by the way, not only is this speaking from, the science, it's also speaking from firsthand experience as a young, 20-year-old boy who was the skinny kid who was insecure about how skinny he was teased and picked on when he was little, being, bird boy and being called anorexic and, all the names I've been called for the way. You could see when I was 20 years old, and if I lifted my arms up, you could see my rib cage. That's how skinny I was. And so I was, obsessed with trying to build muscle, coming from a place of insecurity, and thought this. And this is what I did. Trained 7 days a week. I've done double days, trained all the different training programs, tried every supplement, did all the steroids too. I tried it all. In pursuit of building as much muscle as I possibly can. You do all those things I just said, and you'll see some muscle gain, but not as much as I wanted or thought I should have for the amount of effort and work I was putting in. It wasn't until I became way more experienced, way more educated on the exercise science, human physiology, nutrition, which came much later in my career. And then it all came together for me, and I realized, oh no, this is not like anything else I've done. There is definitely a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I think the part that's also challenging is you can be doing things the wrong way and still see some results. And so there's this bit of feedback that you get thinking that you're doing the right thing, but you're not. And so that's mistake one in the pursuit of building as much muscle as possible. I have a saying that I say on our podcast all the time that applies to this, which is the goal is to do as little as possible to elicit the most amount of change. And what that means is I want to apply the least amount of stimulus, change, activity, work in order to reap the most amount of benefits. And there's definitely too little and there's definitely too much. And so it's trying to find that sweet spot of perfect adaptation. And so, and I love my partner and co-host Sal gives this great analogy for how the body adapts with how our skin adapts to the sun, right? To getting tan. And it's a good visual for most people because most people have experienced a little bit of a sunburn when they laid out in the sun too much. And he's like, you think that if your goal is to get tan, you go lay out in the sun. Well, that is the way to do it, but it's the longer and harder you do it for doesn't necessarily get you more tan. What happens, right? If you sit out there for 4 hours in the peak sun and you haven't had any sun whatsoever, you end up getting sunburnt. And maybe you get a little bit of color, but you end up peeling and turning more red than you actually tan your skin. Versus that same person who decided for the next 14 days, they would start day one, 10 minutes out in the sun, then 30 minutes out in the sun, and then an hour in the sun, and then maybe eventually they could work up to the 4 hours and be fine. But what you do is you're doing as little as possible to elicit that change. You're getting enough exposure so your body starts to adapt. And what we don't want to do is do so much exposure that the body gets this loud signal of recovery versus an adaptation, because those are two different signals. We even though they are connected and they work together, but your body, if it gets too much damage, either from the sun or exercise, because both of those the body receives as a stress, if you do too much of it, then the body prioritizes recovery over adaptation. And which is what people get caught in what we like to call the recovery trap, which is they're just constantly doing damage and stress to the body, and they're never giving the body a chance to truly adapt. It's always in trying to recover because you're constantly attacking it. That's what happens with exercise. And that's what happens when the young man or even girl who is trying to build muscle and is highly motivated makes that mistake. They go in thinking that more intensity, more days, more time is going to give me more results. And that's the same mindset if you were to go out and be like, I'm going to lay out in the sun in Mexico or somewhere for as long as I possibly can to get tan. And I think most people hear that and go like, well, that would be a terrible idea because they know what would happen to them. Well, guess what? That's no different with exercise science. You can't just do tons of, and just like the tanning analogy, you'll get a little bit of color from that, after the blisters wear off, if you can, but not a lot. And so if you go train really, really hard, like crazy, lifting weights and eat more calories, you'll build a little bit of muscle. But what will end up happening is the body will receive that loud stress signal as it being constantly attacked. And so recovery becomes the priority versus adaptation. And we want adaptation. We want the body to receive that signal of stress and go, oh, we need to be prepared for the next time he decides to stress me this way. Let's get stronger. Let's build a little bit of muscle. But if that signal is too loud, then it's constantly more defending itself, going, oh God, that was too much. Recover, we're hurt, we're damaged. So I would say that's the number one mistake when first doing it. So understanding that is key, is that if I'm coming, and that looks different, there's a big spectrum there based off the individual. So if you're someone who's listening to this, and which is probably a lot of people who kind of fell off Halloween time and then Thanksgiving time and then Christmas time, and so this time of the year represents them getting back into training or back into shape, or maybe the first time ever because they're motivated because of New Year's. The amount that person needs, because they haven't been doing anything really exercise and diet wise for the last few months, is very little that they need to do. They just need to turn that knob a tiny bit. And so it starts off with finding out that, right? And figuring that out, like, where am I coming from? Now, how do I start to apply exercise? And so just like I would with a client who is trying to lose a bunch of weight that's coming off from the holidays, I'm doing the same thing with the guy or the girl that's trying to build muscle. And so first prescription is, let's just track. Let's just kind of find out your basis. I like 2 weeks. I can work with a week, but I like to tell clients, like, just give me a snapshot of what you're eating every day and your movement. Those two are the big key factors for me. And so in those 2 weeks, I actually want them to continue on the similar behaviors they were doing just, say, 3-4 weeks ago. I don't want them to go, oh, my trainer is tracking what I'm doing. Let's make good food choices. Let's get to the gym twice a day. And they do it. Like, no, that's not the idea. The idea is we get a really good idea of your baseline and what you've probably been doing for the last 30, 60, 90 or more days consistently, so that I know how to apply that intensity that I'm talking about and what knobs to turn just a little bit, just that little bit of change that we need to do to elicit, or that little bit of training change or nutrition change to elicit that adaptation that we want. So that looks like that. And so I love your basic step counters. So any Fitbit, Apple Watch, Whoop, whatever you use, but to get some sort of tracking on your activity. How often are you? And a lot of those tools also monitor sleep, which is a great thing for us to kind of peer into while we're doing all this tracking. So I just want that. I want to see where your activity level is. And then I want to see nutritionally what you're eating. Again, not trying to impress me as your trainer. You just eat like you normally would, which means if you have a hard time getting up and having breakfast and you skip it, I want you to skip it right now. If you eat ice cream at the end of the night, every night, I want you to do it. And it's literally just to really get an idea where we're at. And then from there, I'm going to make these small tweaks. Now, most common things for the person trying to build muscle that struggles with that, almost always, in fact, 99.9% of the time, that person is under eating protein for optimal protein. Maybe not what they need to live and survive, but under eating what is optimal for building muscle, especially for somebody who's about to start a strength training program. So normally I just start right there after I assess. So since 99.9, I can pretty much tell everybody this is kind of the first tip, which is, okay, however much you want to weigh. So if you're skinny trying to build muscle or just trying to build muscle, what does that look like? And we'll use my body round numbers. Let's say I'm 200 pounds and I want to be 220 pounds of lean muscle. So I'm going to eat 220 grams of protein. We can get into, what the science says in the books on 0.6 to 0.8 per lean body mass. That's what the science says. What that number comes out to for the average person that's really easy, that kind of covers all your bases, is 1-to-1 ratio. Whatever you want to weigh on the scale, eat that in grams of protein. That puts you in that optimal space. So instead of trying to get into arguments on, I heard so-and-so say this, like, that's over decades of training clients, we have found that this is just an easy, good number for people that they so them to break their calculator out and figure out their lean tissue every 3 weeks and how that's changing, and then multiply it by 0.6 or 0.8 1-to-1. So go hit your protein intake, and then let's start a training routine. And normally when it comes to lifting, again, here's the mistake. I always want a client to commit to something that they know they can do forever and not do what they're willing to do right now. And when you're in this state of motivation and you're excited to get going, and it's the New Year's resolution, you overdo it by going like, well, I could get in the gym pretty much every day at this time, or 5 days a week easily during the week, and I'll just take weekends off. So I'm going to go Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. That's my time to go to the gym, and they go to the gym every single day. That's not my suggestion. My suggestion is starting somewhere between 1 and 3 days. That's it. Again, if you weren't doing anything before, this is like me giving you the advice of, if you have all this, let's just get out in the sun, 3 days a week for 20 minutes. That's it. That's going to be enough to already start to tan that skin. You getting in the gym 1 to 3 days a week for 30 minutes to 60 minutes of strength training is enough to already send a signal to the body, we need more muscle than you currently have right now, because you weren't doing that before. Now you are starting to, and that alone, paired with hitting your protein intake consistently, will already start building those first few pounds of muscle. Guaranteed. Guaranteed if you do that. Where you might go wrong is by doing more than you think you need to do and overreaching on the training. And that is how you go to a hard plateau, is, again, if you fall into that recovery trap that I was talking about. Or you make the common mistake, which is not only do you over apply the amount of training you're doing, you also you have a hard time consistently hitting your protein intake. So the combination of the two of those is a recipe for no results for a long period of time, yet feeling like you deserve them because you're working so hard in the gym and you're making sacrifices nutritionally, yet no results are happening. So that's how I start that person.
I love how you brought that up, because that is an overlooked mistake, right? I think if you were to ask somebody what the most common mistake is, I think a lot of people would say they do a dirty bulk instead of a clean bulk, and they're just trying to gain weight instead of gaining like clean, lean mass, right? And they just eat whatever they want, and they're gaining weight, but they still kind of look pretty, they don't look the way they want. I know there's a lot of mistakes that people make when they're in the gym as far as how they exercise, form, sets, reps, that if they're not careful, they can actually end up wasting time in the gym. What are some of the like do's and don'ts when lifting in the gym?
Great question. So let's talk about probably some of the biggest or most common things that people do. I mean, and again, this isn't me just speaking from the science and experience of 20 plus years. It's also, I made a lot of these mistakes too, thinking I was doing the right thing. We all tend to gravitate towards the things that we'd like to do. And it seems that more often than not, the stuff that we should do are the things that we don't tend to do as much. And what I mean by that is the exercise selection portion, right? The type of exercises or movements you should be doing. The big five, right? The squat, the deadlift, the overhead press, the bench press, and the row are the 5 best and most important movements that anybody should be doing in the gym. That literally should be your cornerstone. In fact, if all you did for the week is do, 4 to 5 sets of each one of those 5 movements I just said 2 times in the week, that right there would start to really change the physique for quite some time. In fact, if you go back and you watch that docuseries that I did on YouTube, you see that I'm actually only doing 2 exercises, 2 lifts a day, but I'm choosing from those movements. Those movements are always one of the main movements that I'm doing in the day. And the reason for that is those are compound lifts, and those compound lifts incorporate all the other little muscles that you want to build and sculpt too. It also sends a very loud signal to the central nervous system. And the central nervous system and our muscle are extremely important in the pursuit of building muscle. So not only do I want to do the exercise that gives me the biggest bang for my buck from a building muscle standpoint, I also want to do the one that gives me the best return on my CNS adaptation. So building a stronger CNS. And for people that are like, what does that mean? I don't understand. So I love the analogy that my co-host Sal uses with explaining what the central nervous system, and difference between central nervous system and muscles are. And think of your CNS as the amplifier to your speakers. Your speakers are muscles, and your central nervous system is the amplifier that sends that. Hopefully most people on here understand that the speakers in your house, the way they're powered and work are through the amplifier. And if you don't know this, you could have the most expensive, biggest, strongest speakers in the world, but if you have a cheap little amp that doesn't even power enough of those speakers, you'll never get the full potential out of those speakers. This is like your muscles. So let's say you have incredible genetics and potential to build lots of big muscles, but you have a very weak central nervous system. You're only going to get so much out of those muscles, and they'll only develop and get so big and strong because of how weak the central nervous system is. So think of that when I say central nervous system and building it and adapting it. And so compound lifts give us the greatest return on both of those. And so those 5 movements are the core movements. And what ends up happening is we tend to skip those. Either one, fear of not knowing how to potentially do them, or 2, you know how hard they are and they're not easy to do and they're not fun. And so you avoid the things and you do the things that are more fun, like putting lots of plates on your leg press, or getting in the machine press or row on the cable machine, and the exercises that are easier or more fun to do, or do the stuff that you like doing butt exercises because you want to develop just the butt, and so you're doing these little kickbacks and movements that develop one little specific area. So that's probably the biggest, is so sticking to those 5 core lifts, doing them a handful of times, 2 times in the week, and hitting the protein take. And I'll take you a month to 2 months of watching yourself build muscle just from that advice alone right there.
Yeah. And I think within those movements, it's easy to mess up cadence. It's easy to mess up like time under tension. It's easy, I think, at times to mess up like even like weight, like how much weight you're using, like intensity. I mean, because like as much as I totally agree with what you said. And I think those are incredible exercises, and people, if they did just those 5, they would see amazing results. But if you're not loading enough weight on the bar, or you're not like going full range of motion, like you're going to really sacrifice results. So talk about some of the things that you recommend people doing when doing those movements to make sure that they're maximizing each rep.
So let's say someone takes that advice, like then what becomes the next biggest mistakes, right? So, okay, I get it. Okay. Or maybe I do those things. You mentioned things like, tempo and technique and stuff. So what happens when people, again, are trying to build as much muscle or burn as much body fat is they get in this, they chase the intensity meter more than anything else. And so instead of evaluating the set that they just did based off of their form and technique, how well they did it, full range of motion, was it controlled? Did you get a good squeeze? Did you fill it in that muscle group the entire time? They are looking for signals like, was I shaking? And am I sweating? Am I sore? Like those as their indicators. And that's a mistake to use that as your primary driver of what makes you decide whether you had a good workout or not. And in fact, you're far better off, or trying to go to like taking the muscle to failure, right? Like pushing as hard as you can, shaking and not even be able to finish a rep. So you're like, oh yeah, I did a good job there. Well, no, not necessarily. What happens in these compound lifts when you are doing that, when you're training to failure, well, the body doesn't understand that you're trying to develop the pec right there. It just feels, move this weight, off my chest, and then as it gets really difficult, it's in a really loud signal, just get this off me, this is hard. And so all these other stabilizer muscles kick in to support it, to get it up. And a lot of times you end up cheating the rep or sacrificing the beauty and the perfection of the movement in order to just get the bar off. So that's a huge mistake, and you're far better off lightening the weight up a little bit, slowing the tempo down, and taking it through full range of motion. And then also we like to tell people to stop two reps short of failure. And failure is not, I can't move the bar anymore, I can't get it off my chest anymore. Failure is as soon as the form and technique even slightly breaks down. So if maybe I could have done 4 more reps, but I'm already starting to, the bar's trying to, come up or shake, or my shoulder's coming off, like I'm done. That's it. No more reps. even though my body could get the bar moving. And so this is a major mistake. It's like, no, we're trying to sculpt and build the body. We're trying to build muscle in a specific area. When we're doing the bench press to build muscle, we are trying to build muscle in the chest. We're not just trying to get the weight up, right? So, and this is so important to laying the foundation to what's to come later, because you mentioned something else, like, some people don't put enough weight on the bar, they're not lifting enough, and they don't understand progressive overload. So understand that later on, it's going to become important to really, try and increase the weights later on. But remember, right now, we're just getting started again on this pursuit. So the weight is a little more irrelevant at the time. Right now, it's form and technique get really perfect at this movement, because going from not doing any bench press to doing some bench press is already progressive overload for the body. It's already sending a signal that we need to adapt and build muscle. So again, back to the philosophy, my goal is to do as little as possible to elicit the most change. Well, guess what? Doing any sort of bench press with any sort of weight is going to elicit some sort of change. So I want to make sure that at that time, I want it to be perfect. So my form and technique takes the highest priority. Full range of motion, great and slow controlled reps. If you want specifics like numbers, 4-2-2 is kind of the best place to start hypertrophy wise, which is 4 seconds on the negative, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 seconds at the bottom, 1, 2, and then 1, 2 seconds to get it all the way back up. That's the tempo. Now, don't get hung up on that, is what I would tell clients. I'd say, listen, what I really just want you to do is to slow it down. And so if you need to count in your head to get the concept of what slowing it down looks like, okay, go ahead and do that. But that's what's more important than hitting the 4-2-2 number exactly right. The idea is that you slow the tempo down, you concentrate on form and technique, you concentrate on feeling it in the chest as you press through the movement, and then you rest. And what does rest look like? Rest doesn't look like, 20 minutes between sets. It also doesn't look like 30 seconds or less. Because if we're trying to build strength and build muscle, letting your body recover from the set so that you can put more force output on the next set is really important. And a mistake a lot of people make, again, is chasing the sweat, the burn, the sore thing, the intensity marker. They're like, okay, I did my set, I'm ready to go again, and they go right back into it. And then they turn it into more circuit training than instead of traditional strength training. Well, why is that so important? I'm lifting weights, right? Yeah, but as you start to push it up on the heart rate and shorten those rest periods, you start to get that heart rate high enough, and you start to dip into your what you call the cardio threshold, which is now you're sending a louder signal for stamina and like running, right? So because your heart, it doesn't know any different. Obviously, your legs know no difference, but your heart, it just feels how much faster it has to pump blood. So it's now starting, that signal you're sending is more mimicking the guy or girl who goes out for a run than it is the guy who's trying to build muscle. And so it will switch over and it will start to adapt towards stamina more than it will adapt towards building muscle. So we want to give a good 90 seconds to 2-minute rest between those sets before we go again, so that we're sending this loud, we need strength. Heart rate comes all the way back down. It's not pounding like crazy. I do the next set, and I got more energy to put towards that set, so I can lift the same weight or more weight potentially on that next set. That's a loud strength building signal. That's what our training needs to look like. And form and technique needs to be the foundation. We do not want to sacrifice form and technique to get 5 or 10 more pounds of weight on the bar. Laying a good foundation of good technique is going to be really important, especially at the beginning, because over time, I am going to add weight to the bar to you. And we want to make sure that you've built really good patterns, movement patterns around that bench press, so that your technique is flawless, so that when I add more weight to it, you're more likely to keep that. If you right away start just trying to move the weight and get it off your chest at all cost, forget your form and technique, and you just move it, the body will then adapt to those movement patterns and get good at cheating the reps up, which is not always the best for building muscle in a specific area. So lay that solid foundation by focusing on form and technique as the cornerstone. Don't worry, we've got plenty of time to add load and get stronger. Right now, we're doing as little as possible to elicit the most change.
This episode is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition. Listen, my main goals for the remainder of the year revolve around health and vitality. After hearing about Timeline Nutrition from several of my friends in the health industry, I decided to give their flagship product, MitoPure, a try. MitoPure contains urolithin A, which is a powerful postbiotic that can be challenging to get from your diet. As you know, science has been a big focus on the podcast, so I was really impressed that Timeline has done 10 years of research to bring this product to market. I've been taking their berry powder for over a month now, and have already noticed a bit of a difference in the gym. Some of the long-term benefits I'm hoping to achieve from taking it include improved energy, muscle strength, and endurance, which are right in line with my goals. So I highly recommend you check out Timeline Nutrition, and they are now offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. So just go to timeline.com/Doug to get 10% off your first order of MitoPure. That's TIMELINE.com/Doug. Now back to the show.
And I know you guys talk about a lot the importance of doing like full body workouts and how beneficial they are. You mentioned the 5 movements that if people just did those 5, they would see so much progress. I think what happens, especially with men, when they're trying to build muscle, it's like the average everyday gym goer tries to train like a professional bodybuilder, and they'll Google like Chris Bumstead workout routine. They'll Google Arnold routine, Phil Heath, Cutler, and their routines are all, it's like bodybuilding splits. It's like either one muscle group a day, or it's like push pull legs, or it's like, chest back, etc. What are your thoughts on like professional bodybuilding splits, and what are some of the things people maybe aren't aware of, or they should like pay attention to when it comes to like Googling stuff like that and starting it?
I think this is probably one of the more challenging things to overcome, is to convince the new young gym bro or gym goer on why they shouldn't train like Chris Bumstead, or Arnold, or one of these guys. Like they see that and like, that is the most amazing physique, therefore I should do what they're doing, right, to do that. And it's like, no, they're playing a different game than you. No different than the young athlete who decides to get into playing basketball, and they're looking to the pro athletes as how they do their workouts, what the things they focus on. Like we're almost playing different sports. That's how far apart we are from each other. So you, as the average gym goer who's trying to build some muscle, comparing your workouts, your diet, your everything you do to the Chris Bumsteads, you guys, even though you think you're playing the same game, you're really not. You're playing almost different games because how far apart you guys are from that. And so it's hard to get clients to understand that, wrap their brain around. For the average person, the reason why, and there's a multitude of reasons why we advocate for full body over split for most people. And I think the most important one and the main one is you're not Chris Bumstead and you don't not ever miss workouts. You're an average person. You're going to miss some workouts. You're going to fall off a little bit. And what's really cool when you're running, let's say, our staple foundational program that we pretty much tell all people to start on, obviously most, not ever, but most people, is MAPS Anabolic, which is a 3-day-a-week full body routine. And we actually start them off at 2 days a week, and then recommend once they get to the later version to go to 3 days a week. And aside from what all the research and science says to the competing, because the perfect body part split and the perfect full body workout, what the research says is they're pretty similar in results. But you got to remember, in studies like that, they control all the controllables. So they make the clients do exactly the same thing. In real life, that's not what we don't work in. We're not living in a lab where we do exactly what we're told to do every single time. The reality kicks in, and what ends up happening to most all of us is we get sick or we miss a couple days. And so what becomes really important, and probably I think the most important thing of the argument between full body versus body part splits, is when you miss 1 or 2 days in the gym on a body part split, you now miss a couple of these body parts. So then where do you start when you get back in 3 days? Do you start where you're supposed to be if you would have followed your routine, or do you start back where you fell off? And are you now behind on your routine because you like, and then what do most people do? Oh, most people start back on what they love to do, right? So even though you were probably due to do legs, you do chest because you like building chest. And so your chest now gets the same amount or maybe even more volume but then your legs get neglected even more because you started back over on the week just so you could do chest because you don't like doing legs, even though your body was due for potentially, say, legs. Where it's really easy for the client who trains 3 days a week full body, and let's say they miss 2 days of the week. Well, guess what? They had touched every muscle group. And so what it looks like when they come back looks exactly the same as where they're at. And their body got at least some stimulation on every single one of the muscles. So the likelihood of atrophy in a specific area and going back is way less likely because they sent somewhat of a signal at least to every body part or every muscle group on their body. And so there's a lot of reasons why people make arguments for why full body. To me, I think that's the most important one is because it's easier to build on and maintain when every day you do this full body workout. And so I tend to advocate for that. It doesn't mean that you can't run a split routine and be successful. Obviously, when you see people like Chris Bumstead's, those are examples of that. When I was in bodybuilding, I was doing more of a split, but not until later. Like later on, after I had built this incredible foundation, I'm not missing any days in the gym. I'm going every day, all the time. Like once I got to that level, then yeah, I was doing a body part split. And the reason why it becomes better for me to do a body part split when I come to that level is because my body can't handle 6 to 7 days a week of full body. That's just too much. That's too loud of a signal. It's too much intensity. That's too much volume. So instead, breaking it up in 1 or 2 muscle groups, what I'm really doing is I'm scaling back a bit of the intensity so that my body can handle that. If I went to the gym every day as a bodybuilder and did legs and everything in a full body 7 days a week, I would be fried. I would never see, and that's including these guys that are on all these hormones and recovery tools that they have. You would do too much and you wouldn't see the results. And you're talking about guys that have slowly progressed to that level. So yes, average person, I'm a way bigger fan of starting a client off on a full body, but I want the audience to understand that it doesn't mean that I can't build a physique off of a split routine or that split routines are bad or that you might not even, like you'll see me do split routines, but I'll progress to that before I get to that point. And for the most people, they're not there yet for that to be a better option for them. That's a better option for Chris Bumstead where he's currently at in his career. That's not a better option for where I'm at currently in my training career.
And I think that, in order for people to stay on track with their workout routine, whether their goal is to build muscle or to lose body fat, they need to see progress, right? And I think it's challenging when the goal is to build muscle to track whether or not your strength is increasing, because you can be super strong, but not like look super muscular, right? Or you can be super strong and have a lot of body fat where you just don't have that look that I think a lot of guys want. What have you found to be like the best way to track like how jacked you're getting?
There's a new company out now that I use for this docuseries called Body Spec, which is basically a DEXA scan. It's basically a giant, X-ray on you or MRI type of machine that scans your entire body. They're pretty damn accurate. So the kind of gold standard when I was a personal trainer in gyms was the hydrostatic way, which is the underwater body fat testing. So if you have access to one of those in your area, because there's a lot of companies that fitnesswave.com does it. They have these mobile trailers that come around. So does Body Spec for the DEXA scans. I'd say those are the two kind of gold standard ways to measure your body fat test. Now you do have to pay for somebody outside to do that for you and check it. And so it's a little bit of an investment for you. I think it's well worth it. If you can afford it, I think it's very, very well worth having somebody else do that, say every month, is a really, really valuable tool. And it really is like this. I don't get hung up on how precise or accurate it is per se. What I want is it is consistent. That's what I want, is I want to see what it says now, and then I'm going to go apply my knowledge, exercise and nutrition knowledge, and then I'm going to come back, and even though I believe I know I'm doing the right things, I want to confirm that with the results. And so really that's how I look at body fat testing. And even if you use one that is like, let's say not the good ones, like the scales that you stand on or the bioimpedance ones where you grab on the handles or whatever, those are not the most accurate or the best. But again, I don't care as much on how accurate it is compared to another one. What I really care about is what did it say today? And then I'm going to change these things on my diet. I'm going to increase calories by 500 calories a day. I'm going to now increase my volume of training by, 2 sets on every muscle group for the week. And then I'm going to, at the end of the 4 weeks, go take that body fat test. And then what the results tells me how good of a job I did towards that. If I get, after 4 weeks, I lost muscle and I didn't build any, or I did those things, I added those calories, and then I know to go in and look at something. I made a bad choice. Either I was doing too much intensity and too much volume, or I wasn't eating enough calories in order to add muscle, and so my body wasn't building any. So I that's all I care about. I don't care about what the exact percentage or the accuracy. What I care about is a consistency. I recommend at least once a month on a journey like this. You don't need any more than every 2 weeks, because you got to be careful doing it every week. The body tends to fluctuate when it comes to results like this, and things like inflammation, water retention can play somewhat of a factor in these measuring tools, and can throw them off a little bit more. And when you're only measuring every 2 weeks, or you're measuring every 2 weeks, the body builds muscle and burns body fat very, very slow. So it can be discouraging to try and measure every 2 weeks. So I like every 4 weeks. 4 weeks is enough time that I could potentially have lost a couple percent of body fat. I could have built a couple pounds of muscle. I could have lost a couple pounds of fat in a 4 week time. In a 2 week time, you're talking about, less than a pound of muscle, less than a pound of fat, movement. And that's so little, it can be really discouraging, and it doesn't give the body enough time to see, okay, what's really happening when I consistently eat this way and train this way. So doing that and checking back with yourself on the results and how well you did on there is a great indicator on, is my programming and my diet aligned with what my goals are, and if not, where do I need to adjust? This is also where coaching and training really helps, like to have a trainer like yourself who is the one who's getting that information and then providing the where do we go from here for the client. But it doesn't mean the average person can't figure this out. And so people are going to want numbers, right? So some generic numbers. I'll tell you what's exceptional, and then what's probably realistic on the building muscle. Building a half a pound of muscle a week is exceptional. Okay, so half a pound a week. So that's like 2 pounds of muscle in a month, right? That's pretty exceptional. What's crazy is when you see people do like 4 pounds of muscle, just like on the high, like genetic anomalies, or somebody like me who's coming from a place who I already had a lot of muscle, I lost it, now I'm getting it back. When muscle memory comes in as a factor, you'll see better results sometimes than that half a pound to a pound of muscle per week. Those are the rare cases of that. So those are exceptional numbers. Anything a little less than that isn't necessarily bad. So let's say you only built a quarter of a pound of muscle every week and ended up only getting 1 pound of muscle. That's not bad, especially if you put 1 pound of muscle on and you didn't add any body fat, or maybe even lost a little bit of body fat while doing that. That's what we call the goldilocks zone, is if I can go and measure myself in a month's time and see that I have built some muscle and also see that I lost a little bit of body fat. If I hit that Goldilocks zone, no matter what the number is, if I actually in a month's time saw that I built muscle and burned body fat, that gives me a clear signal that I'm in a beautiful spot, and I'm going to just stay there. I'm not really going to tweak much. I'm going to ride that wave until I fall out of that Goldilocks zone, because it's very hard to get in that zone. But the challenge with the Goldilocks zone is you don't see a lot of change on the scale. So what could happen, okay, and what's crazy is finding yourself in the perfect place, the perfect balance of nutrition and exercise and recovery and rest and all the other things, right? The perfect place could potentially show no change on a scale. So let's say you have this kid, right, and he wants to build 10, 15 pounds of muscle, and you're a great trainer. You have a perfectly dialed nutritionally, perfectly scaling his volume and progressively overloading him. And in 1 month's time, and he hired you and he weighs 180. He hires you, and at the end of the month, he weighs 180 still. And he's like, this sucks. I'm trying to build 10 pounds of muscle, Doug. You suck as a trainer. But then you test his body fat, and you added 4 pounds of muscle, and you lost 4 pounds of fat. So the scale says the same. So if you add 4 pounds of muscle, you lose 4 pounds of fat, the scale will stay the same. Now your body fat percentage will have changed dramatically, well, somewhat dramatically in that short period of time. Not crazy, but a decent amount, it'll have changed. But a lot of times that's not encouraging, or it's discouraging for the average person who doesn't understand how hard that is to do kind of both of those. When you're not really doing just so people understand, but some science nerd on here be like, that's not possible. You can't build muscle and burn body fat at the same time. You're right. You're not. What's happening in the course of 30 days is there's periods of time when your body is anabolic and it's getting a surplus of calories and it's building muscle. Then there's periods of time in that month when your body is catabolic, it's in a calorie deficit and it's utilizing body fat in those periods of time. So that's what it looks like. Now it looks like on a test that you built muscle and burned body fat at the same time. You didn't. You had periods of time. And that's why we call it the goldilocks zone, is because you're in this perfect place nutritionally and exercise wise that you're kind of dipping back and forth. Sometimes you're building a little bit of muscle. Sometimes you're burning a little bit of body fat. And that's such a sweet spot, because the extremes in any direction tend to hinder progress and reach quick plateaus. So when you're in that kind of sweet spot, you're doing this beautiful exchange over the course of a month of adding as much muscle as you are losing body fat, and you're just getting leaner and leaner and adding muscle. But again, really difficult psychologically, because the insecure kid who wants to build a bunch of muscle like I did wants to see the scale go up. I want to see the scale go up. In fact, I remember being that kid and so obsessed with, I'd weigh myself 3-4 times a day. Every time I ate a meal, I'd go get on the scale and see it. And I was always just looking for a new number I'd never hit. Like, man, I'd never seen 185 pounds. And so I would stuff my face as much as I possibly could. And yeah, I'm weight training like crazy. And I'm just constantly weighing, looking for that 186 mark. And then I'd celebrate. Oh my God, 186. But come on, 186 is what? I mean, water and a bunch of carbohydrates I took. I didn't necessarily build more muscle, but in my head, psychologically, I thought I was doing a better job. That's not necessarily true, but is really difficult for the person who's in pursuit of building more muscle.
Any other diet tips other than the protein requirement? You know, I think again, same thing with the workout routine. If people Google so-and-so bodybuilder's diet, it's going to be like oatmeal and egg whites, and it's going to be like chicken and rice and beef and veggie, you know, and sometimes that can be deterring as well, because, you know, a lot of times that's, you know, specific towards them, their goals and what their routine is. What other tips do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of tips that play to this person, but I always want, when I'm training and trying to help somebody, I really want to drill home the most important one first, because it'll move the needle the most for the longest period of time. And that is consistently hitting the protein intake and being in a calorie surplus. And for the person who's struggling to build muscle, that is the hardest thing for them to do consistently. And understanding that protein is not an average of what you do every day. Every day you restart, and you either are successful or you fail. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times when we talk about, and this is different with calories, when you're talking about being in a calorie surplus or a deficit, we take everybody's days and then we average them out for a week, and we say, oh, so this day Doug had 2,500 calories. This day he had 2,000 calories. This day he had 3,000 calories, 2,700 calories. At the end of the week, we go, oh, you averaged, Doug, 2,650 calories, which that's a good job, because your goal was to be at 27 and your maintenance is at 25. So you're in a slight surplus. Good job, Doug. Let's try and bump it a little bit more next week if we can. That would be a successful week if we were trying to increase your calories by a few hundred every day, even though some days you were a little bit higher, some days you were even a little lower, but then other days you made up for that because you're higher. That works when you're talking about calories. When it comes to protein, it's day by day. So let's say you had your goal is 180 grams of protein every day, and you did a good job on Monday, and then on Tuesday you only got 90, but then because you only got 90 on Tuesday, Wednesday you eat 300, and so in your head you're going like, oh, I made up for that. Like, no, you didn't. The body receives that signal of not enough protein with the muscle that you have on your body, and already starts to atrophy and goes, oh, he doesn't have enough food to sustain this muscle on my frame. And the beginning process of atrophy starts to happen. And so we can get into debates on the exact timing of that. I know some of the science nerds will want to get into that, but for layman terms and getting the gist of what's going on, that's what's happening. So consistently hitting the protein intake and being in a calorie surplus is the number one priority over what types of foods. Are they more whole natural or processed? Like, we can get into all those nuances. That's not where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is, can you do that for 30 days between this test that we're taking? Every day hit that protein intake, and every day try and eat more than what your body needs. If your your maintenance calories are 2,500, can you hit 2,800 every single day? And understanding that going to 3,500 or 4,000 doesn't necessarily serve you. You don't need to be in that much of a calorie surplus in order for your body to build muscle. It doesn't take thousands of extra calories to build a pound of muscle. It doesn't. It's very, very little. And so as long as you're in a surplus, and as long as you're hitting that protein intake consistently while also doing your training, is probably the most important thing that I would tell somebody nutritionally in doing that. And this is where things like protein powders come into play. And I use my protein powders, or I advise my clients, different than I think the way that's been marketed to you. It's been marketed to you like drinking a protein shake or bars are healthy foods, and you should, if you're working out, you should include them. That's not what I think at all. I think my goal for my clients is try and get all of your protein from whole foods. Try and eat it every single day through steak, chicken, fish, turkey, all the great sources of protein. Notice I'm mentioning all meats, and I know there's other foods that have protein, but those are the most nutrient dense foods. Meats give you the biggest bang for your buck. And so I'm going to encourage my clients that, of course, you know, vegans are a different story, and it's a whole other podcast. But for the average person who's willing to eat meat, I'm encouraging getting all that protein intake through whole foods. But then at the end of the day, paying attention to where you're at. And if it's, 8 o'clock at night and you had just finished eating dinner at 6:30 or 7, and you see that you're 30, 40 grams under your goal protein, but you just had dinner a couple hours ago and it's late, you're like, yeah, what do I do? Go have that shake. It's a great time to have that shake. Or let's say, normally you have to get this, like Greek yogurt is one of my favorite, like early morning type of small meals between meals. It's like I eat it around 10 or 11 in the morning after my first breakfast. And so, let's say I normally do that around that time, and I know I get about 30 grams of protein at that meal. But oh man, I forgot that Greek yogurt today, or I'm driving and so on time. Okay, that's where I pull over and I get that ready to drink protein shake, and I drink it because I'm replacing what I normally would do in Whole Foods, but I didn't get to it. So that's where shakes and bars are extremely valuable of an investment for people, is to have them as a resource when you need them, not eating them like, oh, this is healthy and helps me build muscle. I'm trying to do this through Whole Foods because that's the best way to do this. But in the case of, me missing my Greek yogurt meal that I normally do, or in the case of I'm behind on protein and it's 8 o'clock at night and I still need it, that's where I'm going to use a shake or a bar. Like, I think those tips towards building muscle, and so long as let's say you're following a MAPS program, I know the programming is taken care of, so you got solid programming, you follow that nutritionally, you're going to build muscle. I guarantee it in 30 days.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I think this episode is a great resource for people on how to build as much muscle as possible and what they can do if they're feeling skinny and insecure about their body to be able to look jacked. So thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you, bro. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.